Okay, thanks everyone. Always best leaving the best one till last. Serpentine leaf miner. This is probably the newest of the exotic pests that have arrived in Australia, although I guess technically it did arrive roughly the same time as fall armyworm, but was only reported as being in Australia about this time last year. So we've got a project up on management strategies for serpentine leaf miner. I'll acknowledge all our partners now. There's quite a lot of partners from New South Wales, Victoria, Northern Territory, WA, that are all part of this project, contributing good research and extension to get the information out to growers. Whoops, no, that's not working. There we go. This came about from a previous project, which was predominantly looking at vegetable leaf miner. This is a pest in northern parts of Queensland, up in Torres Strait and the islands. And towards the end of that project, they felt they needed to start looking at serpentine leaf miner because it was another fairly serious exotic leaf mining fly which might come into Australia. And lo and behold, within 12 months, it did appear in Sydney or in New South Wales, and then in Queensland. So a project was born out of that, looking at management strategies of serpentine leaf miner, and included all our collaborators for that. A lot of the information garnered so far is from overseas literature. They've had a lot of experience with exotic leaf miners, and we are looking at developing that or learning from that so that we can produce a suitable management program that our growers can actually run with. So management of exotic leaf miners, what will IPM look like on my farm?
Excuse me, John?
Yep.
Sorry, there seems to be just a couple of issues with the presentation of your slides. We might just, I might just switch back to my slides and then go back to yours, and we'll just see whether we can overcome that glitch. So I'll just take back the presentation. And just, I don't know whether it's just a bit of a lag and I'm switching back to you now, and hopefully it will come through more clearly. Okay, I think that might be better. Yep, right. That looks like we've got it. Okay, go ahead. Thanks, John.
Let's just blame it on the weather.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this pest is, I guess, one of the insect pests which is really suited to an IPM approach. They've done this overseas, and we are hoping to develop the same sort of approach in Australia for this pest. So one of the things, or some of the things we need to start looking at is firstly understanding the role that parasitoids play, know the signs of parasitism, and look at where we actually can find them. So what reservoirs of parasitoids are actually out there. Right. Parasitoids, wasps or leaf miners, mortality from these very tiny wasps results from direct parasitism where they will lay an egg in or on the leaf miner, which will then attack it, or by directly stinging the larvae inside the leaf and then the adult feeds directly on the larvae itself. And unassisted field mortality rates can reach as high as 80%. So they do control a lot of leaf miners that you may not even see out in the paddock. Most of these wasps are very generalist, so they'll attack a whole range of leaf miners, not just serpentine leaf miners. We have to date, I think it's 17 different types of leaf miners in Australia. And so these wasps are out there in abundance, attacking all of those as well. As I said, they're very small, and this is just an indication of how small they are. You got a thumbtack with a small parasitoid on the side. And I'd like to also acknowledge that a lot of this artwork and imagery is from Caesar. Dr. Aaliyah Pertle. Some of this presentation is from her previous presentations that I'm sure you've all heard about. So I've simplified the different types of parasitoids. I'm sorry, Peter, if you're listening. Technical jargon, probably a bit much for some people. So I've categorized as either larval parasitoids or larval pupal parasitoids. Now, the larval ones where the parasitoid will actually inject or lay an egg either on or in the larvae leaf miner, it'll then stop feeding, and instead of a pupae emerging from the leaf, you'll get a parasitoid. Whereas the other larval pupal parasitoids, the parasitoid will lay its egg on or in the larvae, and that won't hatch until the larvae exits the leaf. So it's still mining, and once it's mature enough and exits the leaf, that egg then hatches and develops inside the pupae. And instead of a fly emerging, you will get a parasitoid emerging. We have a number of larval pupal parasitoids and larval parasitoids in Australia. The Hemitarsinus and the Diglyphus are both larval parasitoids, and the Opius is one of the pupal ones which we have in Australia. We have a lot of parasitoids attacking leaf miners or literary misers and other agromysids in Australia. Scientific papers have reported at least 50 in Australia. A lot have been identified from the previous project on vegetable leaf miner. So as you can see, at least 52 parasitoids are known to be present in Australia. And these are just 3 of the more common ones. They range in quite attractive little fly or little parasitoids. We have collected a number of these even in Queensland ourselves. So I guess the take-home message with parasitoids is that we don't need to import anymore. We do have an abundance here. We just need to protect what we have. And as part of this project, we have started looking at signs of parasitism and serpentine leaf miner, both in New South Wales and Queensland. And with the recent detection of American serpentine leaf miner, they've started doing the same thing in Western Australia and the Northern Territory. So monitoring pest activity, follow economic thresholds to reduce sprays and allow parasitoid populations to build. This is exceedingly important, as I'll highlight later. So a couple of first things to look at when you're monitoring, looking at stippling. As you can see here, all these little white dots on the leaf, this is what we call stippling. These are predominantly feeding sites. The female will push her ovipositor into the leaf, move it around, wiggle it about, and when she removes the ovipositor, the liquid that exudes from the leaf, she then feeds on. The male will hover around a female and also try and rob some of that food source because he doesn't have an ovipositor to do it, so they feed directly off the plant. And sometimes they'll actually lay an egg in those sites as well. And you can see in the celery patch how severe leaf mining activity can be on the older leaves. It can cause defoliation in severe cases, and this is probably quite a severe case. So monitoring leaf miner and parasitoid activity, counting infested leaves with signs of damage, and that includes the number of leaf mines and stippling on the leaf. And just because you have mines, it doesn't mean that you need to take any action or intervention. It will depend a lot on the crop that you're growing. Leafy veg are probably more important than, say, a bean or tomato crop, which will be able to withstand a lot more damage before you need to do anything. Counting live larvae within the leaves. You can do that in the field if you know what you're looking for. You can do it under a microscope. What we tend to do as part of our survey work, we'll actually bring the leaves back into the lab, keep them in a plastic bag with some tissue paper or some paper toweling, and just observe what actually emerges from those leaves. It's not easy finding the larvae, especially the small ones. Large larvae, where you can actually see them feeding, are a lot easier to find than the small ones. Counting the pupae on pupal trays. One technique is to put some sort of tray beneath the plant. These leaf miners will emerge from the leaf. A percentage of them will fall to the ground and pupate in the soil, but you will find they will also pupate on the stems or the leaves of the plant. So pupal trays can be an indicator of presence or absence of leaf miners in the crop. And yellow sticky traps. I was shown some recently, and there was just literally hundreds of flies on the trap. If you don't know exactly what you're looking for, there are some flies that look very similar to leaf miners, so they can be confused. So as I said, pupal trays are good if you can actually use them. I tried using them in a celery crop. Those that have grown celery will understand the difficulty of putting a trap in there, and because of the nature of the plant, a lot of the pupae were found on the stems or in the heart of the crop itself, rather than actually on the trays. And counting number of parasitoids that emerge, again, you can just collect leaves, put them in a plastic bag, and observe what parasitoids emerge. Same with the pupae, you can collect pupae if you're using a pupal tray, and just keep them in a container and just see what parasitoids or flies emerge from them. And I guess lastly, we'd like to look at thresholds as part of the monitoring techniques. These have to be developed for Australia. Leafy veg are going to have basically a zero threshold because you're selling the leaf rather than a piece of fruit or a pod. Any damage on the leaf is going to make that totally unmarketable. Just the general life cycle of this pest. Serpentine leaf miner on a good season can lay anything up to 160 eggs, and if everything is in her favor, she can last up to 28 days. Generation time can be 13 days at 30 degrees, but anywhere up to 65 when it's as cold as 10. And the pupae can actually tolerate -11. So our winters aren't going to be cold enough to get rid of them. And even our summers, anything over 30 for serpentine leaf miner will produce mortality. But the American serpentine leaf miner, which has just been found in Australia, that can tolerate a little bit higher temperatures, so that'll last a lot longer. But we did find they will over summer as well. Temperatures within a plant canopy are going to be a lot less than what they are out in the exposed environment. So we have found that certainly last summer, where we had record temperatures of above 40 for days on end, they have still survived. So winters and summer overwintering is a clear possibility. So can you see signs of parasitism? Well, you certainly can. This is one where we collected recently. You can see the leaf miner larvae, if we dug out of the leaf, and next to it is a little parasitoid larvae itself, consuming that smorgasbord. You can have a look under your hand lens or a microscope for signs of parasitism. Here's a parasitoid larvae and a pupae. And this looks like a larvae which has either been parasitized or fed on by the actual adult, where it stung it and killed it. As I said, you can collect pupae, look for parasitism, and already we've been shown distinct signs of parasitism from samples that we sent down from Queensland. So the last area that I want to touch on is avoid broad spectrum insecticides. Don't target leaf miner flies with inappropriate chemicals, and consider the effect of chemicals that are used on other target pests. These leaf miners, especially the 3 that have just been recently introduced into Australia, are known to have some resistance to a number of insecticidal products. So the more you use, the quicker that resistance is going to increase and harder it is to try and manage it. Efficacy of chemicals against leaf miners: you have contacts, which will just knock the fly, the adult. Systemics, if they come up through the roots, will only attack the larvae. And then you have translaminars, which can affect both the adults and the larvae. So knowing just what your product is capable of doing can help. But pesticides can disrupt parasitoids. Now, this is in the management plan or guide that was developed from the previous project, showing how disruptive the various pesticides can be to parasitoids. So your organics, phosphates, synthetic pyrethroids, even your nicotinoids can be very disruptive. Your group 28s and doxocarb are less disruptive, but just because they're less disruptive doesn't mean that they're not going to affect them. So just bear that in mind, that there is possibility that there could be some effect on your beneficial population. And on the AusVeg website and New South Wales DPR website, there's a list of what permits are available and in what crops you can actually use them in. All the ones under here, I've just listed all the permits that are currently available, whether they have contact, systemic or translaminar activity. Have a look at these 2 websites. If you have specific crops, they will tell you what products you can use against leaf miners. But I'm not advocating that you do use pesticides. My first approach would be looking at biological control, looking at cultural options before you use chemicals. And as part of this project...
John, just another minute to go.
Okay.
Thank you.
Nearly finished. Part of this project, we're looking at collecting data to put together a predictive model of just when leaf miners will be a problem in different regions. And of all these images, only one is actually serpentine leaf miner. And I know a lot of you have seen this before, so I won't put you in too much suspense, but the middle one is the only one which is serpentine leaf miner. A lot of the others are native to Australia. And some research gaps which we're trying to look at in this project is understanding the role of parasitoids, monitoring pest activity in different regions, and looking at what options we can use safely to safeguard our parasitoids in the environment. And by all means, please, we are trying to share learnings from this project and raise awareness of it. Anything that you have that works, share it with everyone. It's the only way we're all going to combat this pest together. And it has a huge host range, 20 different crop species, and including a wide range of weeds. So just keep an eye on your weeds at the same time as your crops. Okay, that's it from me, I'm afraid. Over to you, Heidi.